My child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Something is waiting for you inside this message, something connected to a conversation that happened when you were not in the room, a conversation in which your name was never spoken loudly, yet your presence filled every silence. Do not skip this moment. Stay until the end, because the answer your soulmate gave did not merely surprise the people around them. It changed the direction of everything they thought was already decided. There was an offer. Not a casual suggestion. Not a passing thought. Not an ordinary introduction arranged by someone with good intentions. This was the kind of proposal that arrived with confidence, with approval, with promises, with comfort, and with the quiet expectation that no sensible person would ever refuse it. The person being offered to your soulmate had wealth, influence, security, and a future that looked perfect from the outside. Their family spoke with certainty. Their friends exchanged knowing glances. Some believed the decision had already been made before your soulmate even entered the room. But heaven had already entered that room first. Pause here, because the part that matters most is not the richness of the proposal. It is what awakened inside your soulmate when everyone began describing the life they could have. Every promise they heard made them think of something money could never purchase. Every advantage they were shown reminded them of a feeling they had only ever experienced with one person. And though they tried to keep their face calm, their heart was already moving toward a truth they had been avoiding for far too long. That truth was you. Do not skip. Something huge is waiting for you, and it begins with the moment your soulmate realized that comfort and connection are not the same thing. The people around them spoke of homes, status, travel, opportunities, and an easier life. They described a future without struggle, a life where every door would open and every need would be answered before it was even spoken. It sounded impressive. It sounded responsible. It sounded like the kind of choice no one would question. Yet with every glowing description, a strange emptiness grew inside your soulmate. They could picture the beautiful house, but they could not picture peace inside it. They could imagine celebrations, but they could not hear genuine laughter. They could see the approval of others, but they could not feel understood. They could imagine being admired, but not being known. And deep within that quiet conflict, one memory of you returned with such force that they almost lost control of their expression. It was not a grand memory. It was a small moment, one that you may not even remember. A look you gave them when they were trying to hide what they felt. A simple sentence you spoke when they needed strength. A moment when you stayed emotionally present even though you had every reason to pull away. That memory entered their mind while everyone else was discussing wealth, and suddenly the entire room felt distant. Because in that moment, your soulmate understood something they had never been brave enough to admit. You had given them something richer than money. You had made them feel seen. My child, many people will offer comfort, but very few will recognize the hidden ache behind a smile. Many can provide gifts, but very few can bring calm to a restless heart. Many can promise a perfect future, but very few can make the present feel honest. Your soulmate was being shown a life of abundance, yet the thought of living it without the one person who touched their soul made that abundance feel strangely empty. Still, they said nothing at first. They listened. They allowed the conversation to continue. And this is where the tension began to rise. One person at the table noticed the change in your soulmate's eyes. Another noticed how their hands had become still. Someone asked whether they were impressed. Your soulmate gave a polite answer, but it did not satisfy the room. The families wanted certainty. The person making the proposal expected appreciation. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to anticipation. They were waiting for a yes. And your soulmate knew that a yes would close a door they were not ready to lose. Stay till the end, because what happened next was not expected. Your soulmate had spent a long time pretending that their feelings for you were manageable. They told themselves that timing was wrong, that circumstances were complicated, that perhaps silence was safer. They tried to make logic stronger than longing. They tried to convince themselves that if something was truly meant to happen, it would happen without courage. But heaven was no longer allowing them to hide behind delay. This proposal did not arrive to take them away from you. It arrived to reveal them to themselves. The richer offer became a mirror. It showed them what they could gain, but more importantly, it showed them what they were unwilling to lose. It forced them to compare a perfect-looking future with an unfinished connection that still carried truth. And when the comparison became impossible to ignore, your soulmate felt something break open inside them. Not fear. Clarity. For the first time, they saw that their hesitation had never meant they did not care. Their hesitation came from caring too deeply. They had been afraid that choosing you would require vulnerability, patience, honesty, and change. The wealthy proposal offered a ready-made life. You represented a real one. A real life would require them to speak. A real life would require them to stop hiding. A real life would require them to admit that your absence had affected them more than anyone knew. The room kept talking, but your soulmate was no longer listening to words. They were listening to memories. They remembered moments when they almost contacted you. They remembered how often they looked for signs of you. They remembered pretending not to care when your distance began to hurt. They remembered imagining conversations with you that never happened. And then they remembered the one question they had avoided asking themselves. What if you moved on while they were still trying to decide? That question changed everything. My beloved child, your soulmates suddenly understood that time was not standing still. They could not continue holding you in their heart while making choices that pushed you farther away. They could not silently hope you would remain available forever. They could not ask destiny to wait while they avoided the truth. The proposal in front of them was rich in material promise, but it carried one hidden cost. It would require them to let go of you. And that was the cost they could not accept. Someone in the room asked again, more directly this time, "What do you think?" The air changed. Your soulmate looked around at the faces waiting for an answer. Some were smiling. Some were calculating. Some were already discussing future plans in their minds. The person making the offer sat with quiet confidence, certain that the strength of the proposal spoke for itself. But your soulmate's heart was no longer in that room. It was somewhere else. With you. Do not skip now. The words they were about to speak had been building for months, perhaps longer. Yet before they could answer, one older voice in the room gave them advice. They were told that love can grow later. They were told that security is rare. They were told not to let emotion interfere with a wise decision. They were reminded that opportunities like this do not come twice. For a moment, your soulmate almost surrendered. Not because they wanted the proposal. Because they were tired of uncertainty. They were tired of wondering whether you still cared. Tired of carrying feelings they had not expressed. Tired of trying to interpret silence. Tired of standing between hope and fear. The easy choice called to them, not with passion, but with relief. And yet, just as they prepared to speak, something happened inside them. They heard your voice in memory. Not literally, but emotionally. They remembered something you once said about choosing what brings peace, not merely what impresses people. They remembered the way you had encouraged them to be honest with themselves. They remembered that whenever they were near you, they did not feel the need to perform. And then came the revelation that left them unable to continue pretending. They realized they did not want a life where they had everything except truth. That single realization moved through them like light breaking through a closed room. Their posture changed. Their eyes lifted. Their voice became calm. Everyone leaned in. But before your soulmate gave the final answer, they asked a question no one expected. They asked, if all of this disappeared, what would remain? The room went quiet. The person making the proposal seemed confused. One family member tried to redirect the conversation. Someone laughed softly, thinking it was a philosophical joke. But your soulmate did not smile. They repeated the question. If the money changed, if the status changed, if the plans changed, what would remain between us? No one had prepared for that. Because the proposal had been built around what could be offered, not around what had already been felt. The promises were strong, but the connection was weak. The future looked polished, but the present held no depth. And in that silence, your soulmate received the answer without anyone needing to speak. Nothing meaningful would remain. That was when they thought of you again. With you, even silence had meaning. With you, even distance carried emotion. With you, even conflict revealed that something real existed underneath. And suddenly, the difference became impossible to deny. My child, this was not about choosing poverty over wealth or struggle over comfort. Heaven does not ask you to reject blessing. The deeper lesson was that your soulmate could not build a sacred bond on convenience alone. They understood that a prosperous life without emotional truth would eventually become a beautiful prison. They looked at the proposal. Then they looked at the people around them. And finally, they looked inward. The answer was ready. But one last pressure came before it was spoken. A close relative leaned toward them and quietly said that refusing would embarrass the family. Another warned that they might never receive such an opportunity again. Someone else suggested that the person they truly cared about may not even feel the same. That final sentence struck deeply. Your soulmate wondered whether they had imagined your connection. They wondered whether your heart had already closed. They wondered whether they were about to reject certainty for a hope that might no longer exist. For several seconds, they said nothing. This was the battle no one in the room could see. One future offered proof. The other offered faith. One was fully presented. The other remained unfinished. One had everyone's approval. The other had only the quiet pull of the heart. And yet the unfinished future with you felt more alive than the perfect future without you. Something huge is waiting for you, because at that exact moment your soulmate made a decision that was not based on what they knew about your current feelings. It was based on what they finally knew about their own. They realized that even if you no longer wanted them, they could not choose another person while their heart still belonged to you. They could not accept a proposal as an escape. They could not use someone else's devotion to silence their own truth. They could not enter a lifelong promise while secretly wondering what might have happened if they had been brave enough to speak to you. That realization gave them courage. Their voice was quiet when they began, but every person in the room heard it. They said, "I am grateful for everything being offered." The smiles returned. Some believed the yes was coming. The person across from them sat taller. But your soulmate continued. And that is exactly why I cannot accept. The room froze. No one moved. No one expected refusal, especially not after such a generous proposal. One person looked offended. Another looked stunned. Someone asked whether your soulmate understood what they were giving up. The person who had brought the families together began speaking quickly, trying to recover the situation. But your soulmate was not finished. They said, "A person deserves to be chosen completely, not compared to someone who already lives in my heart." My child, that sentence left everyone speechless. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was true. The people in the room suddenly understood that there was someone else. Some exchanged looks. Some immediately wanted to know who it was. One person asked whether this hidden person was wealthier. Another asked whether they came from a more respected family. Someone wanted to know what advantage this unknown person had. Your soulmate answered with words that changed the atmosphere completely. They said, "It is not about what they have. It is about who I become when I think of them. Stay till the end. Do not leave now, because what followed was even more unexpected." Your soulmate began speaking about you without saying your name. They described a person who challenged them to be honest. A person whose absence carried more weight than the presence of others. A person they had tried to forget but could not. A person whose kindness returned to them during their hardest moments. They admitted that they had been afraid. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of timing. Afraid of what others would think. Afraid that the connection required more courage than they believed they possessed. But the wealthy proposal had shown them something undeniable. Losing you through silence would hurt more than risking the truth. The room did not know what to say. Even the person whose proposal had been refused seemed to understand that this was not an insult. It was an awakening. They had not lost to someone richer, more powerful, or more impressive. They had lost to a connection that had never truly ended. And then came a question that turned every eye toward your soulmate. Someone asked, "Does this person know how you feel?" Your soulmate's face changed. The strength in their voice softened. They looked down. And for the first time that evening, uncertainty returned. "No," they said. That single word carried the weight of every message never sent, every truth never spoken, every opportunity delayed. The room reacted in disbelief. One person asked why they would reject such a powerful proposal for someone who did not even know. Another said it was foolish. Another warned them not to chase an illusion. But your soulmate did not defend themselves with anger. They simply said, "Then it is time they know. My beloved child, this is why this message found you." Something has shifted. A decision has been made in a room you never entered. A truth has been spoken in front of people who never expected to hear it. A door that looked golden has been closed because your soulmate could no longer ignore the door inside their heart that still opened toward you. But do not misunderstand the moment. This does not mean every obstacle has vanished. It does not mean the path ahead will require no patience. It does not mean every fear inside your soulmate has disappeared. What it means is that they have crossed an inner line. Before this moment, they could pretend. Now they cannot. Before this moment, they could delay. Now delay feels dangerous. Before this moment, they could tell themselves that a different future might be easier. Now they know easier is not the same as right. They left that room carrying more than relief. They carried urgency. The silence between you suddenly felt louder. Every unsent message became heavier. Every missed chance became more painful. And as they walked away from the people who were still discussing what had happened, they reached for their phone. Their hand trembled. Your name was there. The message box opened. They typed a few words. Deleted them. Typed again. Stopped. Because how do you explain that you just turned down a life everyone admired because one person still has your heart? How do you confess that the thought of losing them became more frightening than the fear of being rejected? How do you admit that a room full of wealth made you realize where your true treasure was? Your soulmate stared at the screen for a long time. Then a new obstacle appeared. A message came to them from someone who had been inside that room. A message warning them not to contact you yet. A message saying there was something about you they needed to know first. And when your soulmate read the next line, the courage they had just found was replaced by shock. Because the person claimed that you had already made a decision of your own. Your soulmate read the message twice. Then 3 times. Their heart began to race. The phone was still open to your name. The words they wanted to send were still unsent. And now they were forced to choose between believing what someone had just told them, or trusting the connection that had already made them refuse everything. But what they did next was something no one saw coming.